Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will speak before the UN General Assembly on Thursday. On his way to New York, Yi helped open the new Chinese embassy in Panama City. China and Panama established diplomatic ties in June, and together the two countries have signed trade and investment agreements worth nearly $38 million.
The Chinese embassy in Panama will work diligently to fulfill its obligations by implementing the Chinese government's friendly policy on Panama and by working with the Panamanian people to jointly open a new era of mutual benefits, cooperation, and development.
Chinese companies are already involved in dozens of infrastructure projects and have expressed interest in developing the land around the Panama Canal. Joining us now in studio is Zhang. He is the chief correspondent for Shanghai Wenhui Daily here in Washington. Also with us is Benjamin Creutzfeldt. He is a fellow on China, Latin American and U.S. affairs at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Thank you to both of you for being with us. So let me start with you. The Chinese news agency Xinhua says Panama could be a strategic bridge to extend China's Belt and Road Initiative into Latin America. How does China leverage this new relationship?
I think this diplomatic tie between China and Panama is long overdue, and China should have established a diplomatic relationship with Panama about 10 years ago if Kuomintang was not leading Taiwan. And I think Panama is having very strategic importance when it comes to China-Panama economic relationship. This country is linking this Pacific Ocean with the Caribbean Ocean, linking North America with South America, and I think this country will be very helpful for China to expand this OBOR and to have more economic cooperation with all the American countries. And I think we are just starting to see the new future between the two countries. Especially Panama has been experiencing economic slowdown in the last a couple of years, and I think Panama government has been waiting for this golden kind of time to come between the two countries.
Benjamin, this is a significant development, isn't it? I mean, it's significant diplomatically, politically, and commercially for China and Panama. These two countries established diplomatic relations in June. That's after Panama switched from its recognition of the territory of Taiwan to the People's Republic of China. How significant is that?
Well, it's interesting because it comes at a time, as my neighbor emphasized, of several years of a truce, essentially. There was a truce for 10 years since Costa Rica switched from Taiwan to Beijing. And this was something that was a sort of tacit agreement. And there was little movement there. And so now we see something that, yes, it's indeed significant. At the same time, it is surprising that it took so long. I was living in Panama myself about 10 years ago, and there's a huge mainland Chinese population there that has been migrating there since the 80s. So there are many people who welcome this change also on a practical basis.
Yeah, talking about that practical basis, what is your view on how this translates into how China expands its presence in that part of the world?
That is also very interesting, considering the big energy supplies that can come from Venezuela. Of course, at the time, a troubled relationship, but one that China has invested a lot in. And then there's also the big question mark over the Nicaragua Canal, which doesn't exist, but has been there's been some guesswork going on and lots of talk about that being a possibility as a competition to the Panama Canal. So this move actually quite significantly detracts from the voices coming especially from Nicaragua, but also around the world, worried voices often that see there some new development. Beijing has consistently said they don't have interest in developing this. And now this new relationship with Panama, I think, shows that added to which there are quite a number of very significant investments, projects starting up in Panama now. So This means it sort of takes away from Nicaragua, possibly from that.
Right, so talking about projects, of course, China is heavily involved, not just in Panama, of course, around the world, in developing infrastructure in growing countries, developing countries. It has already announced that it will be doing the same in Panama. What kind of projects are we looking at here?
I heard at least China is one of the major customers of the Panama Canal, and we are building the second largest port along this canal for Chinese commercial needs. And also China is investing to establish a kind of new, I think, subway and also a kind of highway. And I think we will see more infrastructure investment from Chinese side because we believe that Panama has a big potential to link China with many parts of African continentals.
Talking about those links, Benjamin, I mean, building infrastructure is one thing, but how does this relationship evolve into a bigger relationship, more trade-oriented, commercially, economically?
Well, interesting, of course, that China tries to have sort of a multifaceted approach in its diplomacy. So it has also just launched a very large project for building subsidized housing. There's a new city, Ciudad de la Esperanza, in Panama. So it's trying to sort of, you could call it part of a charm offensive. It's obviously something that the government itself, the Panamanian government, proposed, and Chinese investors have eagerly participated in. So there are several things going on in parallel that I think make Panama, therefore, what it has long been a naval hub for trade. It's one of the big cross-shipment points for trade from across the Caribbean basin towards Asia. And that's something that, again, Panama has also been very keenly interested in the Pacific Alliance, for example. And although the Pacific Alliance has its own Pacific coast, there is also quite a bit to be done. And it has very well-developed ports, something that, for example, Colombia has strongly developed ports on the Caribbean side, but not so much down the Pacific, although Buenaventura is growing. So Panama really takes quite an important position and has already. The commercial relationship doesn't change significantly through this relationship, but it sort of gives it a more solid footing and makes it easier. I think that was also quite crucial for Chinese business people to simply travel to Panama, get their visas, get things sorted out.
Song, if we look more broadly at China's relationship with Latin America, South America in particular, I mean, in 1990, I was looking at some figures. Investment was negligible. It was almost nothing. That grew to $260 billion in 2012, and no doubt it's increased even further now. Why has Latin America become so important to China?
I think especially it has two perspectives from it. I think in 1980s, the political and diplomatic relations between China and South American countries was not so good. And also now the political relationship between the two sides has been improved dramatically. And also in the last couple of decades, China has become one of the major economic and trade powers in the world. And China believes this South America, Latin America is having a very big continental, very hardworking, and still the economy is not, I think, developed enough. And I think China believes a big potential is there, and China is willing to expand our investment over there in Latin America. And we believe in the future we can help economy to develop in this continent, and also help China to export our goods and also import like petroleum and other energy, among other goods from this continent. I think
China is already a very big commodities importer from this region.
I think China's trade with this continent is now about 6% of our total trade. Right. And I think it has a very bright future to develop. And at the same time, our this trade volume with America and European countries have more or less become like less kind of developing. So I think China is looking at long time kind of future for this.
Right. Benjamin, China, of course, has relations throughout the world. But when we look at China's priorities, what do you read into the fact that this was a pretty high-level delegation that went to Panama, led by the foreign minister?
Yes, that is interesting. Clearly, we have to distinguish also the two big regions in Latin America, which is the Central American area and South America. So South America has been has since the 80s, really, some earlier than that, but has had strong relations with China, or at least firm diplomatic relations, except for Paraguay, whereas Central America was almost entirely affiliated to Taiwan. So that in itself was sort of an imbalance and a different tendency. So the fact that now, for the first time in 10 years, since Costa Rica changed in 2007, one more country, Panama, has decided, I think one could say itself, to engage on an even level with Beijing, that is important for that particular area, and it's quite possible, some have surmised, maybe other countries will follow. This is a possibility. And the motivations for that are many. I believe there are several countries. Nicaragua has said specifically, quite pointedly, they will stay with Taiwan. Honduras have just had the Honduran ambassador to Taiwan recently said we need more investment from Taiwan. So they're trying to stick to their current line, but it's quite possible that this high-level delegation also implies, we can do more in this region.
Zhang, of course, the Foreign Minister Wang Yi has made his way from Panama to New York, where he will lead the Chinese delegation at the UN General Assembly this year. He will address the Assembly on Thursday. What can we expect?
I think this year's General Assembly of UN is going to have a lot of debates, and especially when we look at the US government, Mr. Trump has been threatening to withdraw from Paris Climate Agreement, and also US is hesitated to continue this Iran nuclear deal, and among many other issues. And I think there will be a lot of debates. I expect Mr. Wang Yi to especially talk about the hot issues, including this climate change and also Syrian crisis, anti-terrorism, and also DPRK nuclear issue. And also I think Wang Yi will be lobbying for more globalization, more free trade, more kind of anti-protectionism, among other issues.
Benjamin, to what extent has China, or is China, taking advantage of the new policy on the part of the United States, the America First policy, withdrawing into itself, not engaging so much with the world?
Well, I think a lot is made of that. There was a lot of nervousness after the various, often contradictory things that President Trump has said. So similarly, people have interpreted this. I mean, China has a very solid approach to its global expansion, commercial and also diplomatic. I mainly look at Latin America, but also in other regions of the world. You can see that China has, in fact, laid out plans. It has white papers, various regions of the world for some time. So I don't really think that China will, it would be a mistake, in fact, if China tried to sort of show itself now as the new globalization promoter. I think there will be more balance.
And I guess, of course, a lot of these decisions were taken long before Trump came to power.
Precisely.
Right. Okay. Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. Be sure to stay with CGTN America for continuing coverage from New York and the United Nations on the General Assembly. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.